a man was convicted almost 4 decades after he ended the lives of 2 women in California. Then, he interrupted his own sentencing hearing by singing in front of his victims' families. In 1986, 18-year-old Michelle Xavier and 20-year-old Jennifer Duey's naked and lifeless bodies were dumped in a remote area of Fremont, California. Michelle and Jennifer attended a birthday party dinner together on February 2nd. Hours later, the young women were found deceased by a motorcyclist along Mill Creek Road. They had been shot and stabbed. Despite numerous tips following the crime and thousands of leads, the case went cold. The case went cold for more than 3 decades until a detective found that it was David Mish's DNA under Jennifer's fingernails. At the time of the crime, Mish was an illegal substance addict who lived in the Fremont area and was known to burglarize businesses. Mish's father, Robert, was an alcoholic who was aggressive towards his wife and son. As a result of the constant physical assaults, he lost all interest in the educational process and spent most of his time on the streets. He was convicted in 1990 for taking the life of 36-year-old Margaret Narcissa Ball and sentenced to life imprisonment. Mish is also linked to the disappearance of Michaela Joy Gerecht, a 9-year-old girl who was kidnapped from a Hayward parking lot on November 19, 1988. Michaela was with her friends at Rainbow Market when a man moved her scooter closer to his car. When she tried to get the scooter back, he grabbed her and drove away with her in his car. She was never seen alive again. In 2020, Mish was charged with ending the life of Michaela. The Alameda County District Attorney's Office wrote, Mr. Mish claimed that he had seen the 2 young women being kidnapped at gunpoint and tried to save them. He used this as an explanation for the presence of his DNA in this case. Mish's DNA and lies were presented as evidence at his trial. Another piece of evidence stemmed from one of the victim's hands, which had a partial license plate number written on it. The plate matched a vehicle associated with Mish. On December 19, 2024, a jury found Mish guilty on 2 counts of first-degree slaying. On January 21, 2025, during his sentencing hearing, family members were reading their victim impact statements when Mish disrupted the proceeding by singing inside the courtroom. The sheriff's deputies then removed him from the courtroom. The prosecutors said that Mish displayed disrespectful behavior purposefully so that he would be thrown out. Chief Assistant District Attorney Royal Roberts said, David Mish's behavior in court was not only reprehensible, but a blatant display of no remorse for taking the lives of Jennifer Duey and Michelle Xavier. The families of these 2 young women have been waiting nearly 40 years to receive justice for their tragic and senseless slayings. Roberts said, thanks to the jury and this conviction, Mr. Mish will be held accountable. I want to recognize the prosecution team for their professionalism and hard work on this very complex case, starting with Deputy District Attorney Allison Donovan. 63-year-old David Mish will begin serving 2 25 years to life sentences consecutively in state prison after he completes the 18 years to life sentence he is currently serving. After nearly 40 years, the loved ones of a slain Colorado man finally got the justice they have been seeking. On November 21, 1985, 51-year-old Roger Dean became the victim in a slaying that was so horrific it was like a scene from a movie. A man in a ski mask broke into Roger's Lone Tree home in Littleton, Colorado, and forced him to tie up his wife, Doris Jean DJ Dean, and tape her mouth shut. He then demanded the $30,000 in their savings account, but Roger tried to flee the house, and then the intruder shot and ended the life of Roger. A backpack and an orange ski mask that Roger tore off from the perpetrator's head was left behind when the suspect left the scene. According to witnesses, the perpetrator ran down the street of their neighborhood and got into a car. Those witnesses said sped away. From the beginning, several aspects of the case puzzled the investigators. Roger had twine marks on only one wrist, so it appeared that he had never actually been tied up by the gunman. Also, Roger was wearing contact lenses when he was shot. Yet, strangely, in an upstairs bedroom, his glasses were found covered with duct tape. Sergeant Anthony Spurlock of the Douglas County Sheriff's Department believed that both the twine and glasses were red herrings, planted to give the impression that Roger had been blindfolded and bound. He said, "We believe that Roger hired an individual to come over to basically kidnap him, take him to his bank, withdraw $30,000 from their account, and then obviously drop Roger off someplace so Roger could report a robbery and he would have that $30,000 to himself." During the investigation, the police also learned that Roger had taken nearly $30,000 from his business and put it in a secret account. According to DJ, her husband was not capable of what the police had accused him of. She said, "In my heart, I cannot believe that Roger had anything to do with this. This is the man I was married to for 26 years. And yes, there had been personal problems in the last years, especially since the demise of our son, but I knew the man too well." DNA samples were taken from the hair on the ski mask that was left behind, but due to a lack of advanced DNA technology, the case went cold. 5 years later, on July 21st, 1990, DJ and their daughter Tamara received an anonymous letter. Its author claimed to be the man who took the life of Roger. The letter demanded $150,000 that he said was owed to him. If the money was not delivered, he threatened to slay again. The letter read, in part, "Do you know that I have met your daughter Tammy on a few occasions? Do not make me end her. Your son is deceased. Your husband is deceased. Do not risk your daughter. She is the last one left." The authorities were convinced that the letter was legitimate and that it was written by Roger's perpetrator. He wrote that he would call her 6 days later on July 27th. DJ and Tammy were given round-the-clock protection. FBI agents moved into the house and set up a wiretap. When the man called as promised, he told DJ that Roger owed him money and that he wanted to be paid back. DJ agreed to pay him the $150,000. The FBI traced the call to a phone booth in Denver, but by the time they got there, the caller was gone. Roger's perpetrator called 12 more times, and then he told DJ to drive to a supermarket 20 miles north of her home and wait for further instructions. DJ tried to trap the caller with the help of an FBI agent hidden in her car. Surveillance trucks and a SWAT team were nearby. The man finally called and told DJ to leave the $150,000 in an alley behind an apartment complex in downtown Denver. Later that evening, on August 19, 1990, the FBI watched as DJ made the drop. They waited until dawn, but no one showed up. Special Agent Bob Pence of the Denver FBI said, whether or not he spotted something, whether or not he just took for granted that the law enforcement was involved, or whether or not he got cold feet. And although he did not detect any type of law enforcement, he just was too scared to actually make the pickup. I think all of those are possibilities. In his last call, the extortionist told Tammy that he planned to end her life. He said he would strike when she least expected it. The authorities only knew that the suspect is white, about 6 feet tall, and uses an extensive vocabulary, even though there was an account of a 9-year-old girl, Carly Gibson, that said it was a black man. The statute of limitations has been exceeded in this case, the affidavit says, and investigators were never able to determine who wrote the extortion letters or made the calls, and the case went cold. 13 years later, in 2003, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation was finally able to develop a profile and enter it into a national database. There were no hits. Another 15 years later, in 2018, the investigators had another lab develop a different analysis. And in 2020, an investigator who was well-versed in DNA genealogy was able to determine the people who were likely the suspect's parents. That family had 2 sons. All of the years of waiting for the crime to be solved eventually became insufferable for DJ. She took her own life in 2020, 7 months before genetic genealogical evidence would link the perpetrator to the crime scene. It took decades of advancements in DNA technology for the detectives to link the suspect with items left at the scene, the backpack and the ski mask. Law enforcement began to monitor the 2 brothers. One of them, Michael Shannell Jefferson, boarded the Spirit Airlines flight between Los Angeles and New Orleans, and 2 deputies joined him. The affidavit says, during the flight, detectives saw Michael drinking from a plastic water bottle. During the flight, Michael discarded the water bottle by handing it to a female flight attendant to be placed in the trash. Detectives intercepted the disposal and collected the water bottle without Michael knowing. Testing then determined that the DNA found on the water bottle was consistent with the profile of the samples collected from the ski mask in 1985. An investigator who boarded the cross-country flight with Jefferson also listened to the recorded phone calls sent by the believed sender of the letters in 1990 and said that he believed the voices sounded the same. The perpetrator, Michael Jefferson, was arrested on March 23, 2021 and extradited from Los Angeles to Colorado. On August 6, 2024, the 67-year-old pleaded guilty in a plea bargain. On January 16, 2025, a judge sentenced him to 32 years in prison for ending the life of Roger, with credit for more than 3 years of time already served. It was the maximum sentence, but Douglas County's district attorney believes he could be paroled in as little as 8 years. The victim's daughter said that her father's perpetrator has never taken accountability. Tamara Dean Harney said the following, referring to all of Jefferson's court hearings of the past few years. I have been sitting behind him for 4 years. His expression is exactly what it was the entire time. He seems emotionless. He does not take any accountability. He does not seem like he cares. Tamara also said, he could have done a lot for me and a lot for himself if he would have just talked about why he did what he did and offered an apology at least, or a recognition at all would be helpful. I have no respect for the person at all, Tamara said, given trial delays and the debacle with the recent DNA scandal in the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. I think it is a good thing Mom was not here to witness this. If she was not already deceased, this process would have ended her. The DNA test that would link Jefferson to the crime is also the reason he pleaded guilty to a lesser offense, conspiracy to commit slaying, than he was originally charged with. Former forensic scientist Yvonne Missy Woods worked on this case, and after she was found to have manipulated DNA in other cases, the prosecutors felt that it was too big of a risk to go to trial, even though Jefferson's DNA result was also confirmed by an independent lab. A possible motive is that Jefferson was in a relationship with a woman that was an employee of Roger, so he could have thought that Roger was wealthy, and he therefore wanted money from him. Tamara said the following in court, I never gave up hope that today would eventually come. Trying to put into words the impact that Michael Jefferson has had on me is challenging at best. He not only ended my dad's existence, but over the years, he purposefully attempted to make me question my safety and security, as well as the inherent goodness of people. A former Florida sheriff's deputy has been identified as the suspect in a crime that took place 45 years ago. At around 2 a.m. on November 5, 1979, Sheriff's Deputy John Greer radioed dispatch to say he discovered a sling at the farm store in Ridge Harbor, Florida. The victim, 25-year-old Adele Marie Easterly, an assistant manager at the store, had been shot once in the back and once in the head with a 12-gauge shotgun. The perpetrator, the sheriff's deputy said, escaped with approximately $7.34 from the store. Some deputies were suspicious about John Greer, but they did not have substantial evidence to connect him to Adele's case. A few months earlier, on August 27, 1979, Greer had called the sheriff's office to report that his wife, Jackie Greer, had shot herself in their home in Port Charlotte. He told the responding deputies that he was awakened by a pop and saw smoke coming from a closet in the home. Inside, he found his wife's body. The investigators had suspicions about the incident, but they were not able to link their concerns with evidence. Greer remained free. Roughly a year later, on October 3, 1980, Greer resigned from the sheriff's office 4 days after a female friend of his was found deceased. She was found sitting in her Ford Mustang in a wooded area of Port Charlotte, Florida, 9 days after she was reported missing by her husband. The sheriff's office suspected that she overdosed on pills because empty pill bottles were found in the car and a note was left behind. Her husband, however, told the sheriff's office that Greer used to follow her around and attempted to have relations with her. The sheriff's office followed up on numerous leads in Adele's case, including a friend who said Adele was having an affair with a married Charlotte County sheriff's deputy. The friend recalled Adele describing the deputy's account of his wife's demise as an accidental shooting that occurred after an argument. Eventually, the case went cold. Greer went to work at other police and sheriff's offices, usually near the west coast of Florida. He was also a pilot and held various aircraft positions. 36 years later, in 2016, the Cold Case Unit released a news statement detailing their suspicions in the case, without giving a name. They said that it was to let potential witnesses know a law enforcement officer was potentially involved. Their hope was that someone would come forward with information, and finally, there was a breakthrough in the case. A former sheriff's office explorer came forward and told the investigators that Greer had assaulted her and spoken about ending the life of Adele. She was also working the night that Adele lost her life and said that she saw Greer had blood on his bare hand. The detectives found the woman's allegations credible, but the statute of limitations for potential crimes linked to the alleged assault appeared to have run out. So instead, they focused on the cases of Adele Easterly and Jackie Greer. The Cold Case Unit developed probable cause to arrest Greer, and in April 2023, the investigators traveled to Tennessee, where he was living in an extended care facility in Kingsport. In his interview with the investigators, even though he was bedridden and could not carry on long conversations, Greer admitted to shooting both Adele and his wife. The deputies also investigated another suspicious fatality, and some reported assaults connected to Greer, but were not able to gather conclusive evidence on those cases. Sheriff Bill Prummel said the following in a statement about the case: "I want to be clear that this individual does not represent the overwhelmingly great men and women who have worked for this agency over our century plus of existence." It was determined that Greer would never be well enough to stand trial. He passed away at the care center in Tennessee on March 2nd, 2024. He was 77 years old. In January 2025, after 45 years, the sheriff's office says the long unsolved case is closed. It took 16 years for Chicago police to arrest their suspect in a 1999 slaying, and another decade for him to be sentenced. On May 21st, 1999, 65-year-old Marjorie Collette were found deceased in her bed by her niece in the Edison Park neighborhood in Chicago, Illinois. Jerome Lawrence and another man had been doing remodeling work on Marjorie's house in the days before she was found, so they became suspects. After Lawrence stole his wife's car and called her from Arkansas and Georgia for help, she reported him to the Chicago police. 4 days after the crime took place, a detective and assistant state's attorney went to the Marion jail in Arkansas, where Lawrence had been picked up on a charge of theft by receiving and an Illinois charge of parole violation. The authorities locked Lawrence, whom they found in possession of Marjorie's belongings, in an interview room after questioning him. They returned that evening to an empty room. Lawrence had crawled through the ceiling and walked out of the jail, becoming the 5th person to escape from the then new facility. The last time Willie Britton saw his stepfather was earlier the year when Lawrence was being arrested on a domestic battery charge for beating Willie's mother. Within a month of that arrest, the police were interviewing Willie and his mother about Lawrence in connection with a far more gruesome crime: the slaying and home invasion of far Northwest Side resident Marjorie Collette. Willie said that Lawrence came up with the plan for the home invasion, which he discussed with his relatives. Willie said he saw this as a way to support us, a second chance. He figured he had this lady and she would be his easy come-up. Lawrence believed that Marjorie, who had worked at Walgreens for 35 years and had retired months earlier, was rich. He smothered Marjorie with her pillow, slit her dog's throat for barking, and went off with a bag full of her electronics and a safe. Lawrence, who was arrested multiple times in Florida and used an alias there, was never connected by Florida authorities to the Chicago case. On February 11th, 2015, 16 years later, 32-year-old Willie, who has had nightmares about seeing his stepfather again, relived one of his worst fears as he walked past Lawrence. They were in the 5,300 block of North Lincoln Avenue in the city's Budlong Woods neighborhood. Willie said, "I could not believe it. My jaw almost dropped. I pulled out my phone and called the police. I told them his name and that he is wanted for first-degree slaying, and he has been wanted for 16 years. Willie went into a nearby Chase Bank as he awaited the arrival of the officers. When the police responded minutes later, he ran outside screaming to point out Lawrence. But the police, Willie said, were reluctant to arrest Lawrence, who presented them with a Florida Department of Corrections ID with a different name. Joseph Mahar. Willie said, "They almost let this man get away again. He presented the bogus ID. I am like, look, I know 100% fact this man is my stepfather." The police then arrested Lawrence after checking his Illinois Department of Corrections photo and eventually confirmed his identity with fingerprints. He was then charged with first-degree slaying. On September 14th, Lawrence had swapped the jeans and gray hoodie in which he was arrested for a brown Department of Corrections jumpsuit. When Lawrence walked into the Cook County Circuit Court courtroom, he stared into the sparsely occupied gallery where Marjorie's niece, Judy Beavis, was seated. Judy, who anxiously leaned over the courtroom benches with her hands clasped during the hearing, said, "I am just glad they got him because he threatened our family. When he escaped, the police were watching the house. Through the investigators," he said. "Once he got out, he would get us. It is kind of scary seeing him back in Illinois." Florida Department of Corrections officials said that once an inmate is in custody, his identifying information, including name and fingerprints, is sent to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, which in turn relays it to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The FBI then assigns the inmate a number. In Lawrence's case, the FBI officials assigned him a second number before they made a connection between his warrants in Illinois and the new arrests in Florida. Prosecutors portrayed Lawrence as a career criminal, pointing to 6 felony charges, including burglary and robbery in Cook County, and 4 other felony charges in Florida, including fleeing and eluding in 1999, robbery in 2000, and arson in 2005. Nearly a decade after he was arrested, on February 4th, 2025, 55-year-old Jerome Lawrence was sentenced to 17 years and must serve 85%. He will be given credit for the 3,434 days already served.